The Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute is driving bold policy solutions for a resilient Canadian agri-food system and building a stronger future for Canadian agriculture. Visit capi-icpa.com to discover how.
Welcome to The Truth About Ag. Welcome to the Truth About Ag podcast, distributed under the RealAgriculture Media Network and powered by the Hebert Group of Companies. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. So, Hebes, after the last few podcasts, I finally get to say that I know this guest personally. So, Ken, you sat in on one of our farmer coaches last year, and then the producers loved it. They got to ask you questions. It was great. So I'm hoping we can get around to some of those topics today and kind of get that moving as well. So, well, with every guest, Ken, we kind of start off with the same question of, we try to get guys who were born and bred in Western Canada and how they went up through the ranks and got into the positions they are. So why don't you give us a bit of your background and how you went from a dairy farm to holding degrees in agriculture, engineering, and executive management training?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying thanks, Jens, for inviting me to have the discussion here with you both. It's good to see you both again, and obviously to talk about agriculture. Yeah, so as you say, Evan, I'm from a dairy farm just outside of Regina, about 20 miles northeast. So we got our mail from Xenia, Saskatchewan, population about 8, I think. That's about 4 miles up the road. And then, we went to church in Edenwald, which was about 9 miles away. And not far from the Capel Valley. So that's home for us, for me. We built about 110 cows as I was growing up. And so for those days, that was actually pretty big. And for those that are in dairy farming business, you know what that entails. That's twice a day, 365 days a year. And so we did that for a lot of years. And I was, I guess, third generation dairy farmer. It was started by my grandparents in a German community, like I say, just outside of Regina. I have 2 brothers, and, really kind of, at the end of it all, we decided that dairy farming was maybe not something that we wanted to do. And not because it wasn't a great lifestyle, it actually was. And there's, of course, a lot of great lessons that come from your existence on a dairy farm, but it's actually just a matter of different interests. And so we all went off and did different things. Myself, as you say, Evan, I went and I got a degree in agriculture. So I love agriculture and farming, and I really didn't know what the hell else I wanted to do, actually. And so I had a father who was pretty adamant that all things revolve around farming and agriculture. So go get a degree in agriculture. So I did that. And when I finished school, there really wasn't much in the way of jobs, actually. I don't think it was solely because of my poor marks, but that was part of it. But I realized that I'd probably have to go back to school. And one of the other things is, when I was obviously growing up on a farm, like you get to do, is like get to work with your hands a little bit, do practical things. And so with that kind of mindset, I went into engineering school, and I got my engineering degree. And, that was in the late 90s. And when I finished that, I went to work in mining. I was a mechanical engineer at the time. Went to work at Cameco here in town, which of course you may know as the uranium mining company, nuclear fuel company. I did that as an engineer working up on the mines up north, actually, here in Saskatchewan for a number of years. I then moved to Calgary, worked in oil and gas. My wife, her career took us to Calgary, so I worked in oil and gas for 5 years. I came back. I got my MBA through that time period, right, all here at the University of Saskatchewan. You can see it from my window. But yeah, after working in Calgary, I came back to Cameco and worked there for 12 years. And, again, with a mining background, and I sort of worked into sales and corporate development and exploration and all those things, so that, over the course of that time, really fortunate to be having worked for a number of great bosses, but a number of extraordinary experiences. And so that in 2015, actually, I left Canada to join Canpotex. That's the big exporter of potash overseas. I was the CEO of Canpotex, and then joined Nutrien in 2019 into the potash mining business. I was heading up the mining business. So it's really sort of all part of my background. And then in your current role as CEO since August of 2022. So it's just over 3 years. So there's sort of a chronology, but overall of it, Evan, I, being from this province, being from Saskatchewan, you learn a few things, right? Like as an engineer having grown up a farm, I knew which way to turn a valve to get the water to flow. There are engineers out there that don't know how to do that, if you can believe that. Or, I knew what a grease gun looked like, or, on and on and on. I knew how to back up a piece of articulating equipment. Like, so there's some practical things that I learned along with common hard work, but also, Saskatchewan values and not to be too big a Saskatchewan booster, but Saskatchewan values are community. I keep saying, sense of community, of humility, of hard work. I would say of entrepreneurial spirit in this province. You had to be to come to a place this cold and get stuff done, right? So, yeah, I think it's as important as sort of the chronology is the way that the gifts of Saskatchewan and of having grown up on a dairy farm sort of weave through all of that. Yeah, I've been incredibly fortunate.
I'll let you lead off, Hebes, but I do have to say this might be our first supply managed individual on the podcast, so maybe we're gaining some viewers here. I hope.
Geez, I've got to be careful because my whole dairy farm community is still at it, but I have different views about supply management now. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would assume your upbringing on a dairy farm and supply management versus possibly the unknown amount of time you've had to be in Washington over the last year and a half, and their opinion of supply management would give you a pretty strong view of both sides of the story.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, Kristjan. I've always been of the view, and I like probably more strongly today than ever is, as a company, as a farmer, as a country, you do the things that you're best at, right? Like comparative advantage, whatever you want to call it. And you compete because it's a competitive world. And over the very long term, that's the only sustainable way to go about anything is you compete, right? As a, it's like here at Nutrien, got the most competitive potash mine, the most competitive nitrogen business with our access to low cost natural gas. We've got downstream right through onto farms, compete. And I think that, artificial barriers like tariffs or other, sort of trade disruptions don't work over the long term. Again, you have to be able to compete and let those that are better at something do it and buy it from them more cheaply, as opposed to try and do it yourself, more expensive. And again, there are many things in this country we're the best in the world at. We should focus on those things, in my mind.
Yeah.
And so that's where I get into trouble about supply management. And there is, at the end of the day, I kind of think we have to compete.
Well, and I think the interesting part too is we'll go into, I like your Saskatchewan values talk and I like your bosses talk. So there's, I've spent a bit of time with you here over the last 6 months, maybe even more than normal. And you've always got some good stories on mentorship too, right? So I think, you probably in your time at Cameco, I'm assuming got to do some reporting or pretty good discussions with Tim, who's now the CEO over there. And you walk us through, in your career, you mentioned you had lots of good bosses, some of the better, let's call it one-liners or lessons that you feel that you picked up over the way that help in your chair now.
Yeah, for sure, Kristjan. And yeah, like I say, I've been fortunate and, some great bosses. And yeah, as you say, Tim Gitzel over there at Cameco is certainly one of them. I sort of some people that really stand out to me are sort of early on in my career working for an engineer, over at Cameco, actually. is an Asian guy from Singapore, Chan Leong. And the lessons that I took from Chan were, I would say that the motto over at the College of Engineering at the University of Saskatchewan is thorough. It's right on their sort of coat of arms. And I think that's a good word. And Chan certainly taught me in the world of engineering, but it obviously translates to everything that you do, sort of thorough, discipline. If you're going to do something, do it properly, because in the case of engineering, people's lives are at stake, obviously. And in the case of what you're doing on your farm, you've got an entire business that's at stake there as well. So thorough was a word that after working as an engineer, I took away, and it had new meaning for me, having graduated from the College of Engineering at the University of Saskatchewan. And a number of other mentors. I have a boss that tragically, I mean, he just passed away, and he's one of my favorite guys. And the number of lessons from him. He's from where is it St. Brew, where there's one of the big equipment manufacturers.
Borgo.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely St. Brew there, where he was from, and where Borgo's out there. Yeah, he became the head of all sort of commerce for Tamco, and for the years that I worked for him, I started carrying around his luggage, traveling all over the world, and he and I went to probably 50 or 60 different countries together. And at the end, I sort of took his job, and the guy was truly a handshake guy. If he shook your hand and said he was going to do something, it would be done. He only ever told the truth, as difficult as the truth might have been for some people to hear. But that's all he knew how to do, was tell the truth. He taught me a lot about international business and how at the core of traveling to different places in the world, you really only need respect and dignity as the tools in your toolbox. In other words, approaching every culture, every language, every region, every geography with respect and with dignity and without judgment. If you can do those things, you're probably going to have some form of success doing business in these places, because you're not coming all righteous and like we know how to do things better in the West than anyone else, which we don't, by the way. And that as long as you travel to these places with respect, with dignity, and without judgment, you will have an engaging counterparty, and maybe when the dust clears, even friendships in some pretty remote parts of the world, which I've been fortunate to do. So, there's a little bit of a spattering, Chris. You mentioned Tim. Tim understands the word community and what that means here in Saskatchewan, but even more broadly, better than most people I know. So that when Tim gets all, when he is leading a company or sits on your board of directors or is leading the charge on some fundraising, the guy does it with a sense of community like I've never seen before. And that's an extraordinarily important reminder for all of us, I think, as members of a community. And, you're up there, southern Saskatchewan, and Moosomin community is pretty damn important to you, but it's important to me too, as is the Saskatoon community, as is the Saskatchewan community, as in, and again, Tim does an extraordinary job of that. At the end of it all, I walk away with some leadership lessons from that group of mentors that says, and again, it gets back to this Saskatchewan values thing. You act with humility. And I always say I get the sort of paradoxical nature of bragging about being humble. So I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying the people I admire act with humility. They treat people with respect and with dignity. And in other words, without judgment. They sort of do the hard work of understanding what's going on with people, as opposed to the laziness associated with just judging. They have an uncanny ability to create trust. And part of that is through understanding what it means to be in a community, a sense of community. And it's sort of that humility thing. But the people that I've always really admired truly almost have an absence of ego. They don't let their ego cloud decision making and what's best for the stakeholder, call it. In our case, it's shareholders, it's employees, it's communities, it's all those stakeholders that are really important to us. Those are sort of the core lessons from those extraordinary mentors that I've had over the years, Kristjan.
I find it interesting, Hebes. Like I listen to him talk, and obviously genuine as can be. And it's not all, I mean, everybody likes to quote the people that everybody else knows, right? And it wasn't that, Ken. It was just, somebody at one of your small bosses down the line throughout your career that did it. And that's just interesting to me, is that it's always, it doesn't have to be the most flashy mentor. You take what you can from everybody that you meet, right? You are your 5 closest people,
Yeah.
right?
No, I mean, that's exactly it. And, I've, have no shortage of exposure to flashy people, if you can call them that.
Yeah.
And flashy people have things to offer too. It's just, it's you sort of, with that collection of experiences, I always sort of think of it as you gain wisdom, like you acquiring wisdom, right? And wisdom can come from the most unexpected and quirky little places, and life experiences and from flashy people, but it's a collection of things. And wisdom, I think, is a kind of a personal thing, like, because you get exposure to all these things and you take away these sort of, I always call them gems or nuggets for yourself and your own beliefs, and you develop your own worldview of things, how this whole thing, this whole world actually works and what's truly important. And it's exactly as you say, I mean, it's the kind of the acquisition of wisdom that allows you to grow as a human. And I think that you just do that until frankly, the day you die. It's this journey of acquiring wisdom.
Evan, Ken doesn't have to, his absence of ego, I thought was a good one. So as you said, Ken, you're talking about it. And you sometimes don't feel like it's easy to be humble when you talk about it. But I was able to spend quite a few hours with Ken here not too long ago at some meetings. And my 2 favorite conversations were he missed being around the combine. So we literally emailed his EA in the middle of meetings to book for next year because he's got a busy calendar, some time on the combine. But the second one, Ken, was you were telling me, I can't remember who was customers or the board, and obviously plan and security for Nutrien, for Ken and for the board or for large customers is something that we don't have to deal with, but they do. And he was working through to take them to this little, it's pepper crab, is it? That's your favorite meal in Singapore or Southeast Asia. And it's a little downtown restaurant. It's not a 5-star cuisine, something that you'd think. And Ken, he was just so focused that he got this group to go for this pepper crab, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, absolutely. On the first point, it is blocked off. I can just look at it. A big chunk blocked off in the calendar for next year, which, is great. A little nervous because I don't want to destroy a $1.2 million.
How's the general liability at HME?
So I could imagine there's going to be, I'll be sitting, like they have those jump seat things now. I'll be sitting in that. And some qualified operator will be, but nevertheless, man, would that ever be great to be back on? I spent a lot of hours on a combine in my life, and mostly pull type combines, but also self propelled. And yeah, it'd be great to be back on it. Yeah, with respect to, again, that's part of my sort of corporate upbringing is some of the experiences that you have in all of these corners of the planet. And by now, I think it's like 80 or 90 countries for me. Some of the most extraordinary experiences are not the, Michelin 3 stars or whatever, there are the kind of truly local where you're sitting in a place like Singapore or Dubai or, Tel Aviv, or, pick your city, and you actually know that you're someplace different. If you're going to an Italian restaurant in Singapore, you don't necessarily know you're in Singapore, right? You could be just anywhere on earth. But if you go for pepper crab in Singapore, which is the only place you really can't get it, And you walk into the restaurant, it's filled with locals. You're in someplace pretty genuine, and you're going to have a unique experience. And that's what I wanted for our board there, and that's what I wanted for our board. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's another quote from another boss of mine. And his was like, "Who the hell do we think we are? We're fertilizer salesmen."
Yep.
And there's some truth to that, right? Like, yeah.
Well, and Hebes, I think you've said it before. We've talked about quality of time versus quantity of time, right? Like it matters more, who you spend your time with and what you're doing than it does actually where you take them. And we've all been around. I mean, Hebes, we've hung out with people where you got to have the most expensive bottle of wine, or you have to have the 5-star meal. It's still just a steak. Let's be fair. It's the people around that actually makes a difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Take a pause from the podcast to call out one of our largest sponsors at The Truth About Ag, Farmer Coach. We have had the largest uptake in the program since its start in 2022 and are looking to have more than 100 producers in for the fall of 2025. We've opened up an additional executive program as our legacy cohort sold out earlier than it ever has in the past, and we are asking producers to reach out for availability. We have multiple new industry supporters this year. Love the industry when they jump on board with education, and they are sending some of their most progressive and young farmers into the program. Reach out to your lenders or your suppliers and ask if they're a supporter, and if not, why not? And lastly, and the most proud we are at Farmer Coach, we are entering our 4th year cohorts, and we have an 80% retention rate with that cohort. The original one has no industry backing. They came because they believed in what we were doing, and now as they enter their 4th year, they have made changes to their operations beyond what I ever thought was possible. So if you're not looking into the program, I ask that you hurry, as seats are filling up, and we want you to figure out your definition of success, and then let us and the other participants assist you in reaching it. The only real question left to ask is one day or day one. Now back to the Truth About Ag podcast.
Well, we'll wheel into some business talk. So I think, I'm assuming you probably had a more interesting 6 months than even farmers, but the world of tariffs and policy and what are the short term and long term strategies that you have to look at Nutrien, because obviously you guys export the majority of your product just like we do on the farm, and so you feel the same issues we do. And so I keep saying that to Evan, that I think a lot of it's timing, right? I think it'll all work itself out over time, but you got to find a way to get there. Just be interesting to hear your take on that.
Oh, for sure, Kristjan. And I won't spend the rest of the time on this one answer, but it's a long story, and actually kind of, for my time, takes me back even to the start of the war in Russia, Ukraine. And with the Belarusians and the Russians producing 40% of the world's potash, and the Russians, over 10% of the world's nitrogen and phosphate, the war and associated sanctions, not necessarily on fertilizer, because the world understood that if you sanction Russian and Belarusian fertilizers, it was going to cause sort of global hunger issues. So intentionally not sanctioning fertilizer, but sanctioning shipping and banking and the whole ecosystem around fertilizer, which had the knock-on impact of sort of quarantining exports within the region, within Russia, Belarus. And that led to massive supply shock in the industry. And you gents remember that better than most, because you know what happened to fertilizer prices, potash prices in particular at the time. They just went right through the roof, which caused two things. I mean, there's panic buying there, and inventories, channels filling up all over the world, and then eventually prices getting so high that farmers stopped buying. At which point, with no demand and high priced inventory, and the channel started emptying out over the period of the next 12 months, prices tanked into a level that was far below what they were prior to the war. So there's this extraordinary volatility at the time. And I tell this story because it had the effect also of redistributing trade flows on the planet. So these are commodities, supply and demand. Prices are set by supply and demand. And with the Belarusians and the Russians really having nowhere to go because of sanctions, they went to the places that don't really care so much about sanctions, U.S. European sanctions, and that was India, China for the most part, and some to Brazil as well. So that we didn't vacate those markets, but India, China, because they were getting all this Belarusian, Russian material, we had to reduce the amount of volume that we were sending there in favor of other markets, like, of course, North America, but some into Brazil and Europe and certainly Southeast Asia. And I keep saying that two things happen with rebalancing of trade flows. There's more uncertainty in the market, so more price volatility, and increased cost. Because, for the most part, when it gets back to this comparative advantage discussion we were having at the start, for the most part, we're all producing and competing and sending our products to the markets that make most sense to us logistically, right? In other words, kind of our backyards. China's kind of our backyard. It's 2 weeks to sail off the West Coast. Obviously, North America backyard, East Coast of Brazil, we can get to pretty easily. Some other parts more difficult, like Ukraine. So with everybody going to like unnatural destinations or somewhat unnatural destinations, ourselves included, prices go up, and it costs us more. So yeah, volatility and cost, and then comes along the. But we successfully redistributed where we were sending our products. That's part of the benefit of selling to over 50 countries. Then comes along the war in the Middle East, Gaza, and the impacts on shipping through the Red Sea. The big Israeli potash producer no longer able to do that. I always tell this story. I know that the CEO, a former CEO who's retired now, that he used to get an email from the Houthis in the morning saying, "I see you're on the shipping schedule to come through. We're going to be shooting at your boat, just so you know." And that was an email. Yeah, and it's like, why do they do that? And he said he didn't think that they wanted anyone to get killed. They just shot at boats. And so he got the warning. Anyway, it's an interesting story. But yeah, so they had to stop going through the Red Sea and then off through the Mediterranean or across the line over to the Mediterranean. Another rebalancing of trade flows. It caused disruptions on natural gas supply, which had implications for the nitrogen market. Another major global event where we had to shift and rebalance and think differently about our markets. Then, now I'm getting to your question. It comes along.
No, that's good.
And tariffs are just another sort of introduction of whether it's a war, whether it's geographies and difficulties through Red Sea or sanctions on the Russians, rebalancing the trade flows. It's just another barrier to what should be free and flowing and natural trade, right? And so yes, tariffs have not necessarily for what we do in our products going to the U.S. because we are USMCA or CUSMA compliant, but more so on the bigger global picture. And it's really a couple things. One is we're reading about this China and soybeans with the U.S. almost every day in the newspaper, right? And that's causing the U.S. farmer, 92% of which voted for Trump, real grief on soybean prices, right? And their bins are full. They're just pulled off, this extraordinary crop. And they have no relief as it relates to soybeans off their farms. So China and soybeans are an enormous problem, I would say. And the only way, and you and I talked about this, Kristjan, the only way that gets resolved is if the Americans and the Chinese come to some form of agreement here, hopefully between now and the end of the year. Although you just saw a bump in the road even over the last couple of days with the Chinese withholding critical minerals and Trump saying, well, another 100%, onto everything we do. So it's you try and figure out how much of that is theatrics and sort of going through the negotiation dance here, and how much of it is real. But until such time as there is something, I think the U.S. Soybean farmer is going to continue to be in a world of hurt. I know the administration's talking about using some tariff revenue, whatever that is, to provide some relief to the U.S. farmer, but we'll see. So that's one. Two is, Canada, China, obviously, and canola. And the part that I fear is because of the trade, tensions and uncertainty with our American colleagues, and our need to preserve CUSMA, which former NAFTA, which I think should be the absolute priority of the federal government, preserve that thing. Because of that, the Americans are asking us to do some stuff, right? Like stop importing, the cheap Chinese steel and aluminum. And we've got this EV thing, tariff going on. And a lot of it is that the Americans bidding. They're saying, look, we can fortress North America if there is such a thing. But at a minimum, in order to make this negotiation on NAFTA, or former NAFTA, now CUSMA, go more smoothly, we want you to do this vis-a-vis China. So we do that, and they slap 75% tariffs on canola. And no one knows that better than you two gentlemen, and the grief that costs us, right? And for our business, so there's a couple examples, U.S. soybean farmer, Canadian canola farmer, and those are two of our most important markets in the world. And so we say, the only way we succeed is if the Canadian and U.S. farmer, and yes, Australia and Brazil, if farmers succeed, like that's the only way we succeed. We want farmers to be healthy and happy and thriving. And so, we don't like this stuff. And yet I don't really know how to resolve it other than, and, maybe this is at the heart of your question, Kristjan, we as Nutrien just continue to build flexibility into our portfolio so that we, no matter what's going on in the world, have customers over 50 countries. We redirect, trade flows, because it's always a zero-sum game. The Chinese are not getting their soybeans from the Americans. They're getting them now from the Brazilians. If the Chinese are taking all their potash from Russia, well, that means they've vacated Europe, and some of Southeast Asia. That's where we're going, and on and on and on. And us as Nutrien, there's a capital allocation decision here where we need to deploy capital into creating flexibility for ourselves, both on the supply chain and on even the products that we produce. In other words, switching capability, so that we have the flexibility to go to the markets and cater to the markets. As in the zero-sum game, there's like pockets that we can fill. And that's exactly what we've been doing. And I started with the war in Russia, Ukraine, exactly what we've been doing since that time. And I think that that's like, VUCA, which is variability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the world we live in now. And we all need to think about those forms of sort of flexibility, optionality in servicing customers, and new and sometimes capital intensive, but new ways that that allows you to cope with all this global uncertainty.
Interesting part of I'm still looking at his background of agriculture and engineering and trying to figure out where this logistics and international trade experience all came in.
Yeah, I can tell you, I mean, that's 25 years of living on an airplane. That's where that. Yeah.
The other interesting part is, I mean, we as farmers like to always complain that we don't have a customer, right? We all ship to the elevators. We're price takers. But then I listened to your last 10 minutes of having to shift markets and find new customers and all that. And I'm sitting here thinking, maybe it's not a bad thing that we just have one central, because if that gets added to the list of things farms have to do, I'm a little scared at what that looks like.
Yeah, it's true. It is complex, but I tell you, if you look at the way even Hebert Group, and so many of our more sophisticated Canadian farmers are navigating that environment. I think that's a source of pride for me, is because the world it actually continues to shrink. Like, and thinking about sort of new end markets and how these markets work, and in customers in these different markets. Like, I think there is, and I know you market a bunch of your own stuff, and there is opportunity, I think, for Canadian agriculture to probably do more of what you all are doing in the name of optionality, flexibility, and ultimately value for the farmer.
Well, I think Ev, right? Like his comment on what Nutrien's doing is kind of what we've pivoted to here in the last 6 to 9 months with guys we're talking to, is that we used to try to get people to the point of thinking about selling grain 6 to 9 months before you seed it, and then you got the 12 months after, and inputs you got to start looking at 6 to 9 months before you seed, and some people don't get it paid for till after harvest, but that cycle improves. But with the new volatility on both the input side and the output side, like it's now turning into, I think we slowly have to get our infrastructure and our mindset set up that it might be up to 3 years before and 3 years after a crop that we're purchasing inputs or making the grain sales. And you might use strategies of physical, or you might use strategies of futures and options, or you might use strategies of offtake agreements with retails and suppliers on the input side, where you're maybe taking a 10 or 20% position on fertilizer out 36 months in front of that crop. Whether you take the physical or not depends on if they need to run the mines or if the retails have room in the shed. But it's not the way we look at it now. But I think we need to get there. And I mean, you look at the U.S. soybean farmer as a percentage of for storage as a percentage of total farm production. The U.S. farmer tends to be significantly less than the Canadian farmer, just because of their infrastructure around logistics, and the Mississippi helps, and all the co-ops along the Mississippi and the rail lines. So like that, it's a huge disadvantage for them when things slow down in moving in October, November, December compared to a Canadian farm. Because in general, this is generalities again, the Canadian farm does have more storage infrastructure, and I mean, we're even feeling the pain. I mean, I think I got 47 or 49 grain bags out right now because we had big production and slow movement.
Yep. No, exactly. And same thing, you'll see that throughout the Corn Belt, you're going to see more bags than you've seen in a while.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even we had Heimbecker on a couple of weeks ago, Hebes, and he was on to mention that the railways can't move the product that we have sitting there anyway. So, I mean, guys can say we're shutting the bins until we need to, but that need to, you don't have the power if they aren't going to ship it. So what's the plan, right? Like, guys, you can sit on it and then you assume you're going to sell in next week to pay a bill 2 weeks out, and there's no movement because everybody's got the same plan, right? Like it is infrastructure is becoming more and more a farm discussion. I think with most of the guys we work with is, to the point where we're saying, holding grain may actually pay for the infrastructure capital just by doing it if you've actually time it out on present value, right?
Yeah, which is an amazing state, actually. But yeah, I mean, and that's depending on what it costs you to finance this stuff. And Kristjan and I talked about that, but yeah, that stuff can pencil out. And yeah, just about, it's amazing for our business, just the value of those infrastructure investments. When you're moving something bulk that you don't love when it gets wet, then it's the name of the game is logistics and infrastructure. And yeah, I mean, we are all operating off the two same train tracks, right? Now we're all using the same two sets of tracks, and there's a lot of stuff to move on that. So yes, I would say that in this year it's going to be interesting.
Well, I think that that leads to a question we've asked a few other people, Ken, is that, I mean, you're not hands-on the farm anymore, but business is business, and you get a pretty neat look at the view from all the industry from all over the world. What what do you think you'd have for pieces of advice for whether it be the Canadian, Saskatchewan, or North American farmer on where areas within management you'd take a pretty close look at, and look at maybe some tweaking strategies or different strategies over the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, Kristjan, I don't think it's much different than probably the things that we're doing here at Nutrien. I think they probably transfer right onto the farm. And so one of them is, and this is obvious, but is technology, right? And the role of technology that's certainly true in our business, and it's true for farmers as well. And I know there's a matter of sort of, you can think about those things differently depending on scale. And so if you're farming 200,000 acres, you probably think about all of that a little differently than if you're farming 2,000 acres or 200 acres. And, you can go to India, where average farm size is 1 to 2 hectares. Like, so yeah, Indians are thinking about this stuff a little bit differently than you might be on your farm, Kristjan. But, technology is absolutely something that I think we as Nutrien and our whole agriculture ecosystem needs to continue to focus on. So whether that's sort of mechanical technology and all the things you're using around variable rate and whatever else, or whether it's seed technology and sort of chemistry technology and fertilizer technology among sort of the biostimulants and the biologicals, got all your nutritionals. We're supplying a lot of that stuff, and that's going to continue to evolve. We don't think it replaces synthetic fertilizer, but it's certainly kind of augmented it to efficacy. But there's also, and I just really hesitate to kind of use these words, but I'm going to. There's also artificial intelligence. I'm sorry. I know everybody's talking about it.
Yep.
Next biggest, greatest thing, but I do believe that AI in the next 12 months will be providing better agronomic advice than a lot of the world can provide. And why do I say that? Well, we're doing our own work on that. And yeah, it's about using structured and unstructured data to develop your, sort of tool, and it'll spit out prescriptions, recommendations to growers on seeds and chemistry and soil types and moisture level. We use like the whole gamut, and it will lead to better outcomes. I believe that, and so it's not 10 years away. It's not 20 years away. It is immediate, and it is, I think, very, very real. I think we collectively need to pay attention to that. And like I say, I mean, the goal here is better outcomes on the farm. That's our objective here.
I want to take the next few moments to call out another one of our sponsors, Maverick Ag. New look, new team, new location, and new outlook on agriculture. We've spent the last 6 months adding key people and processes to the Maverick team so we can better support the industry in what we see as complex yet exciting times. Our core consultants are the best in their fields across accounting, banking, consulting, and insurance, and we would love the opportunity to show you our horsepower. Some of our legacy products include the core financial product. Are you looking ahead, seeing financial ceilings at every turn? The markets, the cost of production, the banks. We provide a full-fledged projection package that covers your monthly cash flow worries, your bank ratios, your key performance indicators, your cost of production, and your profitability metrics. Fail to plan, plan to fail. Don't go into 2026 without a plan. Number 2, Navigator Strategy product. Do you feel like Groundhog Day is every day on the operation? Are the complexities of managing family, roles, accountabilities, people, compensation, and just the sheer number of decisions you're expected to make becoming a stressor? Are you running the business, or is the business running you? Let our experts sit down with your family and your team and come up with strategies that work. We don't consult on things we've not seen success on in our own operation or those operations that we work with. Let us steer the ship in the right direction. Along with these offerings, we also have other numerous technology, negotiating, insurance, and decision-making products available. Visit maverickag.com for more details. Now, back to the podcast.
So technology, and lots of different pieces of technology floating around. So I'll just use that term broadly. That's one. 2 is, I'm guessing, as the farm evolves, and I think you're probably experiencing this, is that, you're going to need labor, you're going to need talent, because you can't, seed and harvest whatever 100,000 acres in the way that we used to, and there's going to be, you're already operating like very technologically advanced pieces of equipment, and you can't do it all on your own, and it's just going to get more intense, that sort of understanding of the technology. So it's going to take talents. And Kristjan, like, again, you and I talked about this,
Yep.
but that's the thing that we have to pay attention to here at Nutrien, and that's a thing that I'm guessing you do as well. So I'm going to probably list off about 4 things here. So technology, talent. I think whether you're on the farm or you're sitting at Nutrien, everything we've just talked about around global uncertainty. Uncertainty is the new thing here. And so you have to find a way to not just cope with it, but embrace it and turn it into opportunity, right? And Evan, you said, like, you sort of got one customer at the moment, and your price takers, But over time, I think it behooves the farmer or Nutrien or whoever else just to continue to understand what's going on in the world, the implications for all of us, and then how we as an industry, whether that's agriculture, whether that's fertilizer, as an industry, not just cope with that uncertainty, but take advantage of it. And there are ways to take advantage of uncertainty, that's for sure. And then, so that's the third one. The fourth one is, this just question of optimizing capital allocation, which, somebody told me once that that's my really kind of only job. It's to allocate capital on behalf of the shareholders and don't screw it up. And they don't say that, but that I think that's implied. And and it's got to be true on the farmer as well. Like, it's just extraordinary the number of decisions that you all have to make in that capital allocation decision on land, equipment, inputs, like financing rates. You put the crop in, you have nothing to show for it for whatever, a year later. How do you think about all, like, so I think, I grew up, like say, on a farm, and I don't know in those days we were spending enough time thinking about optimal capital allocation, and because it's so complex on the farm, but I think that's something that, it's got to be, and I know it's high on your list, and you're thinking very high about folks' things, but it's got to be pretty high on the list these days.
It's interesting. He's like, he lists off the four things, and those would be the four areas where I'd say agriculture is behind, right? Like financial acumen, human resources, technology, and global policy, or whatever you want to call it, right? Uncertainty. And those are the four areas that most guys come into our office, and that's the part they don't have, right? Farms have been really resilient in the past. They know operations, they know how to work hard. Like, they're really good at getting hands dirty, but it's very few that could actually hit those four whatever peaks that you've just identified and not have some level of stress or complexity that they don't understand, right? Like, it's
for sure. And it is stressful, and I know in addition to managing all that stuff on the farm, I gotta think about what's going on in Belarus. And the answer is, yeah, kind of, because it will definitely inform your timing of your fertilizer purchases a little bit more, probably. And we'll work with you all day long on telling you what we know, what's happening, what's the trajectory of prices. And that's only one example, but Evan, yeah, that's right. Like, it's a lot to take on there, but I'm guessing as farms continue to consolidate, and I think that they will, that those four topics are going to be, and again, that's not the farm I grew up on, but farmers are going to have to bone up on that stuff.
And we like to call them uncontrollables, but they're not. They're controllables from a management perspective. You might not control what comes on the outcome, but you do control how you manage through it or how you plan around it, right?
Yeah, that's right. Like, here at Nutrien, I joke once in a while. I say, like, maybe I don't know, 2,000 years from now, let's say we'll have perfect information, right? And we'll know everything, and you make a decision, and it's the perfect decision because you have perfect information. But here today, we just don't have perfect information. We have far from perfect, like highly imperfect information. So that it is a fight. It's a fight to discover better and better information in the service of one thing, and that's making better decisions, right? And so it's just that continuous battle, probably between now and those 2,000 years when we have perfect information, but we don't today. So you got to fight for it.
Well, again, it kind of leads me down two paths. I talked about Ken about both of these in the past too, and like the first one is I was with Ken and some other fertilizer CEOs, and so his story about Tel Aviv. I mean, I think it was that same mine, right, Ken, that they could lose up to 400 people on a Friday to the reserves. So that's over 10% of their staff. Now, I don't think they had lost anybody yet, but they could lose them from the workforce for an unknown period of time, right?
They did lose some, Kristjan. Absolutely, your example. No, I think they've had, in the war, they've lost, I think, about a dozen employees' lives. Yeah. And they have had, a measure in the hundreds called up to serve the reserves. And yeah, like that, I don't know. So we have 3,000 people in our mining in our potash business unit here, somebody came and said, like, you need to hand over 400 of them. Like, they're not just, standing around twiddling their thumbs. Like, it would be, I'm not sure what we would do.
Yeah.
But yes, Kristjan, absolutely. That's a great example.
Right. So I think it doesn't matter what level of business you're running. There's always some unknowns you have to deal with. I think the other thing we talked about is, with capital allocation, and I said this to the CEOs when I was out there, is that break evens for 2026 look really bad, significantly worse than 2025. And I was up front to say on our farm, my goal between now and March is to shave $50 to $60 an acre off our break even. And if we're feeling that way, I think a lot of farms will. And I think lots of farms go, right to fertilizer, kind of everything but nitrogen is one of their first things. But kind of what we've been looking at is, what are your soil tests telling you? Like, can you borrow some from the soil versus buying? That's one way. Nobody wants to listen to it, but if you can expand 10% and not change your fixed cost model, magically, you can save $10, $15, $20 an acre in your total cost of production by the acre. So that's a way. How can you increase revenue per acre? So is that more marketing? Is it unique markets? Is it different crops? So I think that's something on the capital allocation side we've been talking about lots. But it led me down, and we talk quite a bit in depth about this, and in no way do we have it figured out, right? But we talked about specifically potash and phosphate, but even sulfur a little bit. But, I think there needs to be different plans on how farms look at this, and that on our farm, we take kind of next year's price in October, and compare that to a metric ton of fertilizer. And phosphate in particular, nitrogen second, is like, phosphate's the worst it's ever been. In the bushels of canola or bushels of wheat it takes to buy a ton, nitrogen's like the second worst it's ever been. Potash is a little bit more affordable, but still as a percentage isn't something we like. But at the same time, over the last 3 years, there has been some prices we like, specifically on nitrogen, potash. Phos has kind of been high ever since the war. But, it probably begs that we need to start looking on how we do things different. And I said, like, there might be some purchasing strategies. There might be some using the soil as a bank, particularly on potash and phos, and trying to build levels in lower years. I really think we need to start looking a little bit different on how we do things. And I mean, I've been bugging Evan. Evan's kind of in the middle of building me a 9-year fertilizer calculator, because I think it takes somewhere between 7 and 9 years to get full utilization of our potash and phos. So that on years where that metric isn't great, we have some flexibility, but it's because we know the data to have the flexibility.
Yeah. Well, and to go back to Ken's point, the last one, sorry to interrupt you, Ken, but you'd mentioned using data that's actually accurate. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to build it out so that we can say, oh, this year fertilizer's falling in the bottom 30% of, bushels that we've ever seen. Well, we're going to play the probabilities, and that probably means we should be doubling down and looking at a few years worth of purchases. Whereas, and then when we get to a year like this, it's the exact opposite. It's almost decoupled. It's the worst it's ever been. So then it's, it's no different than how you would plan your business. You're not planning it 2 months out. You're planning it 5 to 10 years out of your buying strategies. And that's just it's unheard of on farms, but we need to do something, right?
Yeah. I mean, what you both are saying makes all the sense in the world to me. I mean, if you use phosphate as the example, you would say that, what does it cost the most expensive phosphate producer on the planet to produce to meet that last ton of demand, right? Okay, so what ton do you need to meet that last ton of demand? And it's something, probably 2/3 of the 700, and north dollars a ton that the global phosphate price is today. So it would tell you, through the cycle, phosphate prices are going to come down. And so what's causing this? Well, the Chinese are keeping more fertilizers in country that they produce, so phosphate, nitrogen, than they ever have before. They're importing more potash than they ever have before. And that's because they're focused on global food security. Economy in China is not good. Social contract says, in order to, avoid civil unrest, or with a minimum, we need to keep people sheltered and fed. And so focus on food security, fewer phosphate exports, fewer nitrogen exports, record potash imports. That has implications for the global phosphate price. That's the single biggest thing that's going on here. Sprinkle on top of that some operational issues with some of the Western phosphate suppliers, and now you really have tightness in the market. That's going on today. And I think maybe like what you've been talking about, understanding those things and knowing that, that last ton to produce demand is something much less than the current market would tell you prices are coming down. So that's good information, probably.
Yeah.
That's valuable information. I could talk about nitrogen and potash in the same way. So, and that has implications, I'm guessing, for you, Jens, for how much storage you build for this stuff, right? And we talked about infrastructure and logistics, how you want to think about buying when prices are low and not when prices are high, inventorying crop nutrients in the soil, exactly as you said. So anyway, it all gets very complex very quickly. I know that, but at the same time, I mean, I'm guessing in the pursuit of better information, this is all important stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, Heath, because you'd mentioned the lean management side of agriculture that we're probably looking at for 2026. And that's the last two clients that came into our office. That's what it was. It was, where do we cut? And we've always said, don't cut the muscle, which was fertilizer. But now it's, how much have you put down in the past? What's your soil testing? Like, is that where we're starting? And for the first time ever, I've got farms who are actually looking at selling equipment to lower their cost of production, which I never thought I'd be alive long enough to see that exclamation in my boardroom. But it's interesting when you start looking at levels where there is no profit. Guys will finally have that conversation that we probably should have had, to be fair, in the good times, so that we were ready for this, right?
Oh my gosh, we live that in Nutrien as well, right? I mean, when you're forced to, you have those conversations, and you say to yourself in those times, "This is how we're going to live our lives for, this with this type of discipline that we're going to do this for the rest of our days." And it's all very well intentioned, but then there's kind of seepage, and wow, does it ever? It requires extraordinary discipline, I would say, and why is that? I keep going back to it's a competitive world. You got to compete. We have to compete. So does Canadian farmer, so does Nutrien. And so, if you look at what's going on with that Brazilian farmer and the runway that they have in front of them to continue to get better and better and compete, wow. No, I think as Canadian farmers, we can absolutely compete, but it requires discipline.
Well, I think it for farms, it's finding that fine line. So, I mean, I think Ken used some good terms there. So, the one unique thing for Ken at capital allocation is he can charge with each of his direct reports on finding X% of seepage, and that's tied to their bonus plan, and they go find it, right? And bring it to him for him to make the decision. Also, he can have them, they have to come to him and have the discussion on, his potash guy's fighting for more money for potash, and his phosphate guy and his retail girl, his HR lady. The problem is sometimes for us farms, we wear all those hats. So we have to fight with each other. Like, we got to fight with ourselves on, are we spending money on more bins? Are we spending money on fertilizer? Are we going to spend more on equipment? Do we need to hire more people? And I think sometimes we just get busy, and it's like, piss on it. I'm going to go sit in the grain in the semi or in the bulldozer, and I'm just not going to think about this. Yeah. Right. And so I think that's one thing that we don't want to have to. One of our unique abilities is we don't have to move. We can move a lot quicker than Ken and Nutrien can. He has a lot of people to get convinced and get on the boat behind it. But one of the positives is how you can have that internal debate on capital allocation. And on our farms, you need to find people you trust, whether that be on your farm team or outside your farm team, to have that debate. And one of the easy ways is strip cash and never be long cash in a farm, because then you always do have that debate with yourself. But I think it's an important piece we need to build into our operating systems.
That is I think, an extraordinary point. So, like, I keep saying the world is so complex that no one individual really, no matter what you're doing, no one individual can sort of navigate it. You need a team of people, and, diversity is a good thing too, for that reason, right? Like, diverse experiences, backgrounds, beliefs, to really test, in the absence of perfect information, right? Or in the presence of imperfect information, to drive toward the highest quality decision in a complex world. It kind of takes a group of people. No one individual can sort of figure that all out on their own. So creating those, and, maybe Farmer Coach is part of that, right? Is just creating those webs of people where you can have those discussions, create better clarity, understanding, and ultimately better information to make better decisions.
And I think that ties back, we've always said, I mean, the successors or the transition plan or whatever it might be is go get experience somewhere else. Cause if you've been taught by me for the last 20 years and you're coming back to take over the farm, there's no new thought leadership coming here. Like you've pretty much been groomed to be the same person, where getting that outside experience and listening to Ken talk about all of the experience he's had in all those different positions, that's what's led to his position today. The other interesting part was he booked off time to go sit in the combine. I thought maybe that was him getting away and escaping for for a week, so he didn't have to make those decisions.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, and I think that was the neat part when I joined, him and some of his colleagues on one of the associations for some meetings, is that I wanted to. It's easy to get mad at fertilizer prices and low break evens, but we get in our vacuum of just talking to farms, right? And so, I got to hear about a mine in Tel Aviv that might lose 10% of their staff every given Friday. Well, what does that do to the cost of their production, or to be honest, even just what they can simply produce? So then you have less supply, right? I got to listen to a number of you guys talk about red tape, right, Ken, around the building of a new mine or a new facility. And so we talk about that all the time at a farm level, that we don't like Municode for building a new shop or something we have to do. I mean, it's next level what you guys have to deal with. And so we sometimes forget to understand the different pieces throughout the industry, and how, if you want to look at prices of fertilizers, a lot of it is tied to policy volatility and supply and logistics globally. So the tariffs that went on the shipping and the finance industry was one of the number one things that ran up fertilizer prices throughout COVID and throughout the war, because of the redistribution routes, right? It didn't necessarily reduce supply; it reduced the speed of supply and where it could go.
Yep,
just a different way to think at it.
But it's easier just to yell at Ken.
Yeah, which is
yeah.
It wouldn't be the first time today. So
yeah. Well, I'll go. Evan, you want me to start on 3 questions, or you got a few left?
No, I got one left, but you can do yours first, and then
we'll
let
so Ken, we know you're busy, and we appreciate having you on. So there's 3 questions I like to ask at the end, and I always tell everybody it's kind of just me being selfish, because I like to hear everyone's answers to write them down. But the first one, I'll give you a softball. One of your favorite books that you've read lately.
Actually, I'm reading this book. It's called The Age of Revolutions by RealAgriculture, and it is just, I'm really enjoying it. And it's really about the various forms of revolution that have taken place since the 1600s. And his point that, we're actually going through the most extraordinary revolution in the history of the planet as we speak today, geopolitically, technologically, and how former revolutions can help inform the one that we're going through today. So I'm really enjoying it. Yeah.
So my second question, which you don't have to answer because I asked it earlier, was like the best 1 or 2 liners you've picked up for business advice or mentors. So if you have some more, that's great. But I wrote a bunch down already too.
You did?
Yeah, you came up with quite a few with the bosses.
You've been taking notes the whole time.
Oh yeah.
You told me. Now I'm worried. What did I say?
No. Well, your one was it started with your Saskatchewan values, right? Community, humility, hard work, entrepreneurial spirit.
Hey, yes.
Yeah. You had your one of kind of. I tied it to. I always use the word, right? Always be curious, right? It even signs off my email, but kind of the way you worded it was the reason you're curious is to build your own platform of wisdom, right? And we all take nuggets from different people, right? In different pieces. Yeah, so but I'm sure you have a one-liner too that you stick to from an old mentor.
I think he was. I think he was worried that you'd taken notes from a past meeting. Is what.
One of my favorite one-liners. It's not like I use this, but it was said to me once by a boss, and I was just getting a little overconfident. I think a little over my skis in terms of my view on things. And he, at one point, I'll never forget this in the conversation, stopped me and asked me if he needed to show me an org chart.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I was like, do I need to show you an org chart? And I was like, no, I don't think you do. We're good. Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So, one of my personal favorites from you, Ken, was, and I think I've told Evan and Jeff about this, was obviously, since you've been in that chair, team reorganization, and we all want super high trust at the top as we start to put organizations through it. But one that Ken gave me, Evan, was like, everyone wants to know these crazy accountability charts and SOPs and how you're going to judge people on one-on-ones. And one of Ken's easy ones he gave me was like, how many times a week does something that they're accountable for end up on my desk? Right. And that's question number one. And question number two is, how many times do I say like, hey, it would sure be nice. I haven't assigned it to anybody. Like it's just barely hit the whiteboard. And I got a couple people that 2 weeks later, like they'll in walk with a 1-page plan around on the thing I said would be nice. I haven't even assigned it to them. And they took initiative to just bring it to me. And I was like, that's actually a great, like it's time is your number one asset, right? And the higher up you get, the more people want access to your decisions and kind of your vision and drive of where you're going. And the more times they can take that and take time away from you, it's just unbelievable.
That is one of the biggest KPIs when I know someone's ready for a big promotion, probably is where I go, okay, there's this one thing we really need to get at. And, I really wish that, and then I look over my desk, it's like, oh, here it is fifth, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
well, that's glorious. Yes.
Yeah. So then my last question, and I should quit telling this joke because it's going to get old. So I used to say if you were the ag minister, but I actually want things to get done, and it hasn't proven over the last 50 years that helps. So the way I word it is, if you had a magic wand and you could do something right now we'll make it specific to Canadian agriculture. What would you do so that in your mind, it could turn into that superpower it should be in 10 years, or even just, I would argue, what could you do right now to make sure that it captures as much of the opportunity that's out there over the next decade?
Oh gosh, I mean, this is going to sound so lame probably, but it's something along the lines of be bold. The Canadian farmer, I think, has earned the right to be bold, has earned the trust, and certainly developed the capability to be bold. And I think it's almost like a Canadian cultural thing that we shine down a little bit. But the Canadian farmer is the most sustainable farmer on earth, the most productive farmer on earth, the most technologically advanced farmer on earth, the most sort of I would say, yeah, sort of business acumen, sophisticated on earth. And I take the point, Evan, that financial acumen is probably can get better, but at the same time, on a global scale, really, really solid. So the Canadian farmers earned all these reasons to be proud, and I think that it's a global stage that we operate on here, and we can, I think, as Canadian farmers, we can occupy a leadership role. And it's not leadership just for the sake of leadership; it's leadership for the sake of of getting value for everything I just said. Like, the Canadian farmer deserves to enjoy the rents associated with that big list of stuff I just said. And that requires us to think boldly about, yes, technology, export markets, capital allocation and balance sheet, talent. Like, it forces us to go to all those places. So I think as Canadians, we should stop apologizing. You might even have an opportunity in the world today as sort of global trade patterns are being rewritten. And so as Canadians, it's like it's turning that uncertainty into opportunity, where you say, with that rebalancing, where can we as a Canadian farmer, what spaces can we occupy that create more value than we are today? And that categorically exists.
Perfect. He opened it up for me. He said, be bold. So I get to ask him the question now. So you've been pretty humble today, Ken. So I want you just to push that to the side for the next 30 seconds. And what do you hope your legacy, not just at Nutrien, but in Canadian and global agriculture would be?
Yeah, I get asked this question, Evan, so that's another extraordinarily lame answer. I don't really believe in it, and legacy, that is. And what's your legacy? If you have kids, maybe it's your children. If you spend time, if your priority is your community, maybe it's your community. for us at Nutrien here, it's if you only knew, it's not just me. It's certainly not just me, right? It's a collective group of people. It's a board of directors, and it's a machine that works together. And I play a role, and maybe an important one, but it is a role. And so it's just to go back to, we've got this Nutrien team, and for Nutrien, what would it be our legacy here at Nutrien? It is to think about this business in the very long term and work with farmers to improve outcomes, because when farmers do well, Nutrien does well. There's perfect alignment there. So that as it relates to things we talked about, technology, talent, capital allocation, and global uncertainty, working together on those things for taking 100-year view of this, not like a 2-year view or whatever. That through that process, and this is like the number one thing, is keep people safe. And wow, we could probably spend an hour on a podcast talking about safety. Like, I'm talking about industrial safety, what you're doing on your farm, what we're doing in Nutrien. That the only way that you can say that you did it properly over that 100 years is if you did it keeping people safe. If you can't say that, that means you haven't done it properly, right? And that over that time period, working with farmers, doing it safely, we just do we exploit our endowment of natural resources, which is like one of the big assets we have, potash and access to low-cost natural gas, in a very responsible, sustainable, and I'll just say Canadian way, because that's the Canadian way, right? If we can step back after 100 years and say, work with farmers to improve outcomes, we exploited natural resources in a responsible, safe way, and first and foremost, nobody got hurt, I think there will be lots of things to do.
Evan, I'm going to tag on his answer.
Go ahead.
There's one little legacy that I want the world to follow based on Ken. And so I think Ken has a great story of how him and brothers grew up on a farm. They decided that maybe wasn't what they wanted to do, but they loved agriculture. And it was growing up on a farm is part of what made him who he was. And we talked about that earlier in the podcast. And I think for farm kids out there listening, some of you are going to want to farm. Some have opportunity to farm. Some don't. You can grow up on a small farm in Saskatchewan and leave a big impact on not only your farm, but on the industry. And I've made it well known all over that I'm a huge fan of agriculture companies in Canada, specifically agriculture ones being run by Canadians, and even better that have a tie back to the farm, because it's different. It's just different on their sense of community, their sense of aligning with farmer outcomes. And so that would be one piece and it's one of the reasons I really enjoy doing some of these podcasts, right? And is I want farm kids to hear your story, Ken, that you grew up on a dairy farm in Saskatchewan and you've been to 60 countries. And I hope one day they all get to, sit and have a burger with you and hear some of the stories of negotiating potash deals in Ukraine and Kazakhstan. And the world's a big place, but the roots and kind of humility that you can get by growing up as a Saskatchewan farm kid can take you all over the world. And I want more people to hear that about you.
Oh, that is just a fact. Grew up on a farm, you go to one of our great educational institutions in this province, and you can basically do anything you want, I think, because you're equipped with the values, you're equipped with the work ethic, you're equipped with the smarts. I think the world is yours. Yeah.
Well said, Ken and Kristjan. So I want to thank Ken again for sitting in today, as well as sitting in on one of our farmer coach sessions, as well as the ops team would like to thank him for taking Kristjan off the farm for a few days and giving them a break. So we'll
welcome ops team.
Yeah, we'll send that one out. Yeah. For those listening, remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and send your questions in. And that's the truth about ag. Thanks for joining us. The Truth About Ag podcast is a proud member of the Hebert Group, which includes Hebert Grain Ventures, Maverick Ag, and Farmer Coach. We appreciate the support. Lastly, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have questions for a future podcast, please leave in the comments below. Thanks for listening.